In an old tailor shop, a young seamstress worked tirelessly to support her little sister. One day, she unexpectedly saw a lonely old man being thrown out of the cafe across the street. She stepped inside, bought 2 cups of coffee, and invited him to stay and share one with her. That simple act quickly turned them into close friends, and when she discovered the old man's long-lost son, she helped reunite their family. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Grandpa's alterations, casting long shadows across the cluttered workbench where Maya Johnson bent over an old Singer sewing machine. At 28, her hands moved with the same careful precision her grandfather Samuel had taught her 15 years ago, when she was just a scared 13-year-old who'd lost everything. Baby girl, she could still hear his voice, warm as honey and twice as sweet. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. You remember that when the world tries to make you hard. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya looked up to see Mrs. Henderson shuffling in with a torn coat draped over her arm. The elderly white woman's face lit up when she saw Maya, the same way it had every Tuesday for the past 3 years. "Oh Maya, honey, I hope you can work some magic on this old thing again." Maya smiled, setting down her work. "Let me take a look, Mrs. Henderson." The coat was beyond saving. The fabric had given up the ghost years ago, but Maya had learned that sometimes people needed their treasures mended more than they needed honesty. She examined it carefully, knowing Mrs. Henderson lived on Social Security and couldn't afford a new coat. "I can fix this right up for you," Maya said gently. "No charge." Mrs. Henderson's eyes welled up. "Child, you can't keep doing work for free. How do you keep this place running?" Maya glanced around the small shop that had been Samuel's pride and joy. The walls were lined with photographs. Samuel as a young man learning to tailor in Alabama, Samuel opening his shop in 1987, Samuel teaching Maya to thread a needle. In every picture, his smile was the same, kind eyes crinkled with laugh lines, hands that had mended thousands of garments and just as many broken hearts in the neighborhood. "We manage," Maya said, though the stack of overdue bills on her desk told a different story. After Mrs. Henderson left, Maya locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. The walk to her small apartment took her past Corner Brew, the coffee shop that anchored the block. Through the windows, she could see the usual afternoon crowd, young professionals on laptops, college students cramming for exams, and in the corner booth by the window, the old man. Maya had noticed him for months now. Every day, same table, same order, black coffee and yesterday's newspaper. He always sat alone, reading every section like he had all the time in the world. Sometimes she wondered about his story, but in a neighborhood where everyone minded their own business, wondering was as far as it went. At home, Maya found her 16-year-old sister Lily sprawled across the couch, textbooks scattered around her like academic confetti. "How was school?" Maya asked, hanging her jacket on the back of a chair that had seen better decades. "Fine." Lily didn't look up from her calculus homework. "Maya, we got the letter." Maya's stomach dropped. She knew which letter, the one she'd been avoiding, the one with the community college letterhead that held Lily's future in its creases. "They need the deposit by Friday," Lily said quietly. "It's $1,500. Maya sat down hard on the edge of the couch. 1,500 might as well have been 15,000. Between the rent, utilities, and keeping the shop afloat, she was lucky if she had $15 left at the end of each month. "We'll figure it out," Maya said, the words tasting like sawdust in her mouth. Lily finally looked up, and Maya saw too much understanding in her young eyes. "Maybe I should just get a job instead. Help you with the shop." "No." Maya's voice was sharper than she intended. "You're going to college, Lily. That's not up for discussion." "But Maya, Samuel didn't sacrifice everything for us so you could spend your life hemming pants and fixing zippers." Maya softened her tone. "You're brilliant, little sister. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling, doing math that wouldn't balance no matter how many ways she approached it. Samuel's voice drifted through her memory. "When the road gets dark, baby girl, you just keep walking toward the light. It'll show up when you need it most." She hoped he was right. Maya's morning started at 5:30, 2 hours before the shop officially opened. She used the quiet time to catch up on alterations, the kind of detailed work that required steady hands and steady nerves. This Tuesday was no different, except for the persistent knot in her stomach that had been growing since last night's conversation with Lily. The shop's old radio crackled to life with the morning news. Something about a tech company CEO searching for his missing father, a man presumed dead after a car accident 5 years ago. Maya only half listened as she focused on the delicate beadwork she was repairing for someone's grandmother's dress. At 7:30, she flipped the sign to open and settled in for what she hoped would be a busy day. Instead, she got Mr. Jameson with a button that had popped off his work shirt, a 30-second fix he insisted on paying $5 for, and Mrs. Peterson, asking if Maya could make her daughter's wedding dress look less outdated for $20. By noon, Maya had made exactly $18.67. She was considering closing early for lunch when she saw him through the window, the old man from the coffee shop. He was walking slowly down the sidewalk, and Maya could see the careful way he moved, like someone who wasn't sure his legs would support him much longer. Henry Patterson had been walking these same streets for 5 years, ever since he'd been released from the hospital with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a head full of memories he wished he could forget. The accident had taken everything: his wife Margaret, his savings, his home, and his son David, who thought his father had died in the same crash that claimed his mother. Henry had tried to find David in those first months, but the trail had gone cold. His son had moved somewhere out west, started over with a new life that had no room for ghosts. Henry couldn't blame him. If he'd been able to start over, forget the smell of twisted metal and the sound of Margaret calling his name, he would have. But you can't outrun grief, especially when you're 72 and everything hurts. The coffee shop had become his anchor. Not because the coffee was particularly good, it wasn't, but because it was warm and bright and full of people who were too busy living their lives to notice one more broken old man in the corner. Jake Morrison was 22 and had never met a problem he couldn't solve with attitude and a raised voice. He'd been working at Corner Brew for 6 months, and Henry Patterson had been annoying him for 5 months and 3 weeks. The old guy ordered 1 coffee and made it last 4 hours, taking up prime real estate during the lunch rush. Today, Jake had decided enough was enough. "Sir," Jake said, approaching Henry's table with the confidence of someone who'd never been old or lonely or forgotten, "this isn't a library. We've got paying customers who need tables." Henry looked up from his newspaper, the same one he'd been reading for the past hour. His eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and for a moment Jake saw something in them that made him uncomfortable, a depth of sadness that had nothing to do with coffee shop politics. "I bought a coffee," Henry said quietly. "That was 3 hours ago. You want to stay, you need to order something else." The entire coffee shop went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence, laptop keys stopped clicking, even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Henry folded his newspaper with shaking hands and reached for his wallet, knowing he had exactly $4.37 to last until his Social Security check arrived on Friday. "I'll just go," Henry said, struggling to his feet. Jake felt a flush of victory that tasted suspiciously like shame. But he was committed now, and backing down would make him look weak in front of his coworkers. "Probably for the best," Jake muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Henry had been humiliated before. He'd been dismissed, overlooked, and forgotten by bureaucrats and bank tellers and busy people who had places to be and important things to do. But something about this moment, in front of all these strangers, felt different, final. He walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last, and wondered if this was how you disappeared from the world, one small humiliation at a time, until there was nothing left. That's when the door chimed, and Maya Johnson walked in. Maya had been on her way to the bank, hoping to convince them to extend her line of credit by another month, when she saw the commotion through the coffee shop window. She didn't mean to stop, didn't mean to get involved, but something about the old man's posture, the way his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller, reminded her of Samuel in his final days. She pushed through the door, just as Henry reached for the handle from the inside. The coffee shop was tomb quiet, that particular kind of silence that follows public shame. Henry's hand trembled on the door handle, and Maya saw Jake behind the counter, arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. She saw the other customers, studying their phones and laptops with sudden fascination, the way people do when they witness something uncomfortable and don't want to get involved. Maya had spent most of her life being invisible in spaces like this, the only black face in a sea of white comfort, the poor girl in the nice neighborhood shop. She knew what it felt like to be looked through instead of seen, to be judged before she opened her mouth. But Samuel had taught her something else too. He taught her that invisible didn't mean powerless. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice cutting through the silence like a bell. She walked past Henry to the counter, where Jake was already putting on his customer service smile. "What can I get you, miss?" "I'd like 2 coffees, Maya said clearly, "and 2 of those blueberry muffins in the case. Coming right up, for here or to go." Maya glanced back at Henry, who was still standing by the door looking lost. "For here." She paid with money she couldn't spare, and carried the tray to Henry's corner table. The old man watched her approach with confusion, and something that might have been hope. "I'm sorry," Henry said as Maya set down the coffee and muffin in front of him. "I was just leaving." "Not on my account, I hope." Maya sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup. "I hate drinking alone." Henry stared at her for a long moment. "You don't know me, that's true," Maya said, "but my grandfather always said good coffee tastes better with good company." This was his favorite, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. He said it reminded him of Sunday mornings when he was a boy. Something shifted in Henry's expression. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." He was. He also said, "Kindness costs nothing but means everything." Maya took a sip of her coffee, which was bitter and overbrewed, just like Samuel used to make it. "I'm Maya, by the way, Maya Johnson," Henry the old man said, his voice rough with emotion. "Henry Patterson." Around them, the coffee shop slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed in whispers, keyboards clicked tentatively, and Jake retreated behind the counter, looking like he'd swallowed something sour. "So Henry," Maya said, breaking off a piece of her muffin, "what do you like to read?" For the first time in 5 years, Henry smiled. Really smiled, not the polite grimace he gave to cashiers and doctors, but the kind of smile that started in his eyes and worked its way down. "Everything," he said. "Though I've been reading the same newspaper for the past 3 hours." Maya laughed, and the sound was warm enough to fill all the cold spaces in the corner booth. "Well then, you must be the best informed man in town." They talked for an hour. Henry told her about his days as an engineer, how he used to design bridges that connected places that had never been connected before. Maya told him about the shop, about Samuel and his philosophy that every piece of clothing had a story worth preserving. Neither of them mentioned the sadness that had brought them to this moment. That would come later, in whispered conversations and shared silences. For now, it was enough to sit across from another human being and remember what it felt like to be seen. When Maya finally stood to leave, Henry caught her hand. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried the weight of 5 years' worth of loneliness. "Same time tomorrow?" Maya asked. Henry nodded, not trusting his voice. As Maya walked back to her shop, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: lightness. She'd been carrying Samuel's lessons like a burden, trying to be good enough to honor his memory. But today she remembered what he'd really been trying to teach her. Kindness wasn't a debt you owed to the dead. It was a gift you gave to the living. Behind her in the coffee shop, Henry sat with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that was still warm. For the first time since Margaret died, he wasn't thinking about everything he'd lost. He was thinking about tomorrow. Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, especially when it's good news. By Thursday, half the block knew about the woman who'd stood up to the rude barista and made friends with the lonely old man. By Friday, someone had posted a shaky phone video on TikTok with the caption "Faith in Humanity Restored." Maya didn't know about the video. She was too busy trying to figure out how to make Lily's tuition deposit appear out of thin air. But she did notice that Corner Brew felt different when she walked in for her daily coffee with Henry. Jake nodded at her respectfully and didn't charge her for the extra shot of vanilla syrup. The regular customers smiled when they saw her coming. And Henry was already at their table, newspaper folded neatly, waiting with the kind of anticipation she remembered seeing in Samuel's eyes when she came home from school. "How's the shop today?" Henry asked as Maya sat down with their usual order. "Slow," Maya admitted. "But I had an interesting morning." My sewing machine started making this terrible grinding noise and I thought I'd have to call a repair guy I definitely can't afford. What kind of machine? Old Singer. Probably from the 70s. It was my grandfather's. Henry's eyes lit up. I might be able to help with that. I worked with industrial machinery for 30 years. Same principles, just smaller parts. An hour later, Henry was kneeling beside Maya's workbench, his arthritic hands moving with surprising steadiness as he cleaned and oiled the machine's internal mechanisms. Maya watched him work, noting the way his whole demeanor changed when he had a problem to solve. "There," Henry said, straightening up with a satisfied grunt. "Try it now." Maya pressed the foot pedal and the machine hummed to life smoother than it had in months. "Henry, that's incredible. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Henry said firmly. "Friends help friends." Friends. Maya felt the word settle into a warm spot in her chest. When was the last time she'd had a friend who wasn't her teenage sister or an elderly customer? "At least let me make you lunch," Maya said. They ate peanut butter sandwiches and talked about everything. Henry's engineering projects, Maya's dreams of expanding the shop, their shared love of old movies and older music. Henry told her about Margaret, how she used to sing while she cooked breakfast, how she could make friends with a lamppost if it stood still long enough. Maya told him about Samuel, how he'd taught her that every stitch was an act of faith, a belief that something broken could be made whole again. "You know," Henry said carefully, "I have a son. Had a son. He's probably about your age now." "What happened?" Henry's hand stilled on his sandwich. "He thinks I'm dead." The story came out slowly, painfully. The accident 5 years ago, waking up in the hospital to find his life erased, the failed attempts to track down David, who'd moved across the country and changed his name after the tragedy. "I looked him up once," Henry admitted. "Online. He runs some big tech company in California now. Patterson Technologies. He's successful, has a beautiful family. I didn't want to complicate that." Maya's heart ached for both of them, the father who'd given up hope and the son who was probably carrying his own load of grief and guilt. That evening, after Henry had gone back to his small room above the laundromat, Maya sat at her kitchen table with Lily's laptop open in front of her. She'd looked up Patterson Technologies, and there he was, David Patterson, CEO and founder, his eyes the same winter sky blue as his father's. The company website had a whole section about David's personal mission to build bridges through technology. There were photos of him at charity events, quotes about the importance of family and community. And in the corner of his bio page, a single line that made Maya's throat tight. "In memory of my parents Henry and Margaret Patterson, whose love and guidance shaped everything I am." "What are you doing?" Lily asked, peering over Maya's shoulder. "Research," Maya said, closing the laptop. "Lily, what would you do if you found out someone you loved was alive when you thought they were dead?" Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all hypothetical questions. "I'd want to know, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt." Maya nodded. Sometimes 16-year-olds were the wisest people in the room. The next morning, Maya stood outside Corner Brew for 10 minutes before she worked up the courage to go inside. Henry was already at their table, but his newspaper lay unopened and his coffee sat untouched. "You look like a man with something on his mind," Maya said, sliding into her seat. Henry looked up at her with eyes that held 5 years of careful hope. "Maya, there's something I need to tell you about my son." "Before you do," Maya said gently, "there's something I need to tell you about him too." She pulled out her phone and showed him the Patterson Technologies website, watched his face go through a dozen emotions as he saw his son's success, his happiness, his public mourning for a father who was sitting in a coffee shop 3,000 miles away. "He's looking for you, Henry," Maya said softly. "There are articles, news interviews. He never stopped believing you might be alive." Henry stared at the phone screen for a long time. When he finally looked up, his cheeks were wet. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" "Of hoping too much. Of being disappointed again. Of disappointing him." Maya reached across the table and took his hand. "Henry, some risks are worth taking." That afternoon, Maya made a phone call that would change 3 lives forever. The Patterson Technologies receptionist was polite but firm. Mr. Patterson didn't take unsolicited calls, especially from people claiming to have information about his father. Maya had expected this, but it didn't make the conversation any easier. Maya, I understand you think you're trying to help, but Mr. Patterson gets calls like this every month. People claiming they've seen his father, people wanting money. I'm not asking for money. Maya interrupted, and I'm not claiming I've seen him. I'm telling you I've been having coffee with him every day for a week. There was a long pause. Maya, Henry Patterson died 5 years ago. Henry Patterson is 72 years old, about 6 feet tall, has blue eyes and arthritis in his hands, but can still fix a sewing machine better than anyone I've ever met. He was an engineer who specialized in bridge design. His wife Margaret died in a car accident on Highway 285, and he's been living above Murphy's Laundromat on Maple Street, thinking his son believes he's dead. Another pause, longer this time. Hold please. Maya waited, watching Henry through the coffee shop window. He was pretending to read his newspaper, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at the door. This is David Patterson. Maya's heart jumped. The voice was Henry's, but younger, stronger, carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. Mr. Patterson, my name is Maya Johnson. I'm calling from Millbrook, North Carolina. I believe I know your father. My father is dead. The words were automatic, but Maya heard the hairline crack in them. What was his favorite breakfast? I'm sorry, his favorite breakfast. When you were a kid, black coffee and blueberry muffins. But anyone could. He told me it reminded him of Sunday mornings when he was young. He also told me about the bridge you built together when you were 8. The one in your backyard, out of scrap wood and hope. The silence stretched so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Is he okay? He's lonely, Maya said honestly, and he's afraid, but he's alive, and he talks about you every day. I'll be on the next plane. Mr. Patterson, he doesn't know I called you. I think he needs to hear that you want to see him. God, yes, of course I want to see him. I've been looking for him for 5 years. Maya gave him the address of Corner Brew. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. He'll be at the corner table by the window. That night, Maya lay awake thinking about bridges, the ones Henry used to design, the ones David was building through technology, the one she'd helped construct between a father and son who'd been separated by grief and misunderstanding and pure terrible luck. The next afternoon, Maya arrived at Corner Brew early. Henry was already there, nervous energy radiating from him like heat from a stove. She'd told him someone wanted to meet him, someone who might be able to help with his family situation. It wasn't exactly a lie. Maya, Henry said as she sat down, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about risks being worth taking, and I think I'm ready to call him. To try. Maya smiled. You won't have to. Henry frowned. What do you mean? The bell above the door chimed, and Maya watched Henry's face go through the same dozen emotions she'd seen on David's website photo: confusion, hope, recognition, and finally, overwhelming joy. David Patterson stood in the doorway of Corner Brew, looking like he'd been running for 5 years and had finally found the finish line. He was taller than his father, broader in the shoulders, but he had the same eyes, the same careful way of holding himself when he was trying not to break. Dad, Henry tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. David crossed the coffee shop in 4 strides and dropped to his knees beside his father's chair, and then they were both crying, holding on to each other like they were afraid one of them might disappear again. Maya slipped away to give them privacy, but not before she heard Henry whisper, I thought you were gone. I thought you were dead. I thought you were too. David sobbed, Dad, I looked everywhere. I never stopped looking. Jake, the barista who'd started this whole chain of events, watched from behind the counter with tears streaming down his face. The other customers had gone quiet again, but this time it was the respectful silence of people witnessing something sacred. Maya walked back to her shop, with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in years. Samuel's voice drifted through her memory. Baby girl, sometimes you plant seeds and never see them grow, but that doesn't mean they don't bloom. 2 hours later, David Patterson walked into Grandpa's alterations. You must be Maya, he said, and she could see Henry in his smile. I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything. Your father's friendship was payment enough. David looked around the small shop, taking in the photographs of Samuel, the careful displays of Maya's work, the love that had been stitched into every corner. My father told me what you did at the coffee shop, how you stood up for him. Maya shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. No, David said firmly, they wouldn't have. Most people would have walked by. You saved his life, Maya. In every way a life can be saved. He saved mine too, Maya said, and realized it was true. David reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. I know Dad said you won't take charity, so I'm not offering any. I'm offering an investment. In you, in this shop, in what you're building here. Maya looked at the envelope without touching it. Mr. Patterson, David, and before you say no, let me tell you something. 5 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. I built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but I would have traded it all for one more conversation with my father. You gave that back to me. I just bought him a cup of coffee. You saw him when everyone else looked through him. You treated him like he mattered when the world had forgotten he existed. Do you know what that's worth? Maya thought about Lily's tuition deposit, about the shop's overdue rent, about all the small kindnesses she wanted to pay forward but couldn't afford. What kind of investment? She asked. David smiled. The kind that lets you help more people the way you helped my father. The kind that turns one small shop into something bigger. The kind that builds bridges. 6 months later, Grandpa's alterations had expanded into the empty storefront next door. The new space housed a sewing school, where Maya taught neighborhood kids and seniors the dying art of mending and making. The original shop remained exactly as Samuel had left it, but now it buzzed with activity and laughter, and the kind of community Samuel had always envisioned. Lily had started college with a full scholarship, not just for tuition, but for room and board and books and everything a brilliant girl needed to change the world. She came home every weekend to help at the shop, and to have lunch with Henry, who'd become the grandfather she'd never had. Henry had moved to California to be closer to David and his grandchildren, but he flew back to North Carolina once a month to check on Maya and Lily and to have coffee at Corner Brew. Jake, who'd been promoted to assistant manager after proving he could learn from his mistakes, always had Henry's usual order ready before he asked. The coffee shop had put up a small plaque by Henry's old table, "Kindness served daily," inspired by Maya and Henry. It had become something of a local landmark, a place where people came not just for caffeine but for the reminder that small acts of compassion could change everything. On a Tuesday afternoon in spring, Maya sat at that same corner table with Henry, David, Lily, and David's 8-year-old daughter Sophie, who was learning to sew and had very strong opinions about thread color. The conversation flowed around her like music, Henry explaining engineering principles to Sophie, David and Lily debating the merits of different colleges, the comfortable chatter of family. Maya thought about Samuel, about the lessons he'd taught her in this very neighborhood. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. When the road gets dark, you keep walking toward the light. Every stitch is an act of faith. She'd learned something else too, something Samuel had never put into words, but had shown her every day of his life. Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about seeing people when they need to be seen, about making room at your table for anyone who needs a place to belong. Maya, Henry said, interrupting her thoughts, "What are you smiling about?" Maya looked around the table at these people who'd become her chosen family, at the coffee shop that had become sacred ground, at the neighborhood that had learned to see kindness as contagious. "Just thinking about bridges," she said. "And how many different ways you can build them." Henry raised his coffee cup. "To bridges then, and to the people brave enough to cross them." They all raised their cups, coffee for the adults, hot chocolate for Sophie, and in that moment, Maya felt Samuel's presence as surely as if he were sitting beside her. She could almost hear his voice, warm with approval, "That's my girl, that's exactly right." Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, just like it had in the shop all those months ago, casting long shadows that connected everything in its path. And somewhere in the warm spring air, the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter, Maya knew that every thread in the tapestry of their lives had been worth weaving. The bell above the door chimed as new customers entered, and Maya watched Jake greet them with the kind of genuine warmth that comes from understanding how precious it is to be seen, to be welcomed, to matter. The world was full of people who needed a bridge, a cup of coffee, a moment of grace. And thanks to one lonely old man and one determined young woman who remembered her grandfather's lessons, there was a little more kindness in the world to meet that need. One cup at a time, one thread at a time, one heart at a time, one heart at a time, the way it was always meant to be.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.